In other news.
The towers did not burn up. They turned into powder in midair.
It's scary to have this helicopter hovering around.
You walk up to them and confront them. They can't stand that.
Welcome to Another News. I'm Jeff Brady. On this show, we've talked with guests such as Kent Bain, Matthew DeLuz, and Peter Shampoo, who have exposed the occult spell continually cast onto human hearts and minds to influence, to bend the will away from grace, away from all that is proper and wholesome, that supports a thriving life close to God. The basic components of this ancient dark practice is astrology, numerology, and sacred geometry. Kent Bain had brilliantly used astrology and sacred geometry to expose numerological predictions of dates and events such as the beginning of the current great age of Satan. Matthew DeLuz and Peter Shampoo focused on nefarious parasitic influences emanating from the confluence of ley line energy, monuments, and sacred geometry. Our guest, Zachary Hubbard, has been studying the effects of this occult practice for the last 20 years, specifically numerology and gematria, the Kabbalistic code of letters and numbers. You've often heard the phrase, learn to code. Well, Zach Hubbard has learned to decode, and he's been teaching those who want to learn through social media and his site, gematria-effect.news. He's the author of Number Games 9/11 to Coronavirus and the book Letters and Numbers, How English's Numerical Code Reveals the Scripting of History, Election, Rigged Sports, and more. Zachary Hubbard, welcome to Another News.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, most listeners on some level know there's a hidden script, a code running beneath our cultural narrative, but haven't got the time to go deep into it. Please tell listeners what brought you to begin learning about gematria and numerology, and then what was it that made you continue to go further into it?
Yes, I was 18 years old. It was 2001, and it was on the date that most of us will remember, September 11th. And nothing sat right with me about the official story that day. And I thought, what are the odds of a national emergency on 9/11 of all days? So I started to look into things, and quickly I found out that 911 was made the national emergency dialing code in the year 1968, which is the same year World Trade Center construction began in New York City. It's also the year George W. Bush graduated from the well-known secret society at Yale, Skull and Bones. It's also the year that 2001, A Space Odyssey, the film, came out by Stanley Kubrick. It's the year the New York Jets had their only Super Bowl winning season. They did win the Super Bowl at the beginning of 69, but it was the 68 season. You might recall after 9/11, it was the Patriot Act and then the emergence of the greatest football team there ever was, the New England Patriots. Boeing debuted their jumbo jetliner in 68. Of course, it was all Boeing planes supposedly on 9/11. And a number of other things. 1968, very interesting year if you look into it. Major political assassinations. Coronavirus was coined that year. Fentanyl was approved by the FDA. But anyhow, I didn't have quite the thing about coronavirus and fentanyl back then, but I saw all the things from 1968 that fit in with what happened on September 11th, 2001. And I noticed that was 33 years before 2001. And of course, that's a special number to Freemasonry. At least the Scottish Rite were the highest degrees, 33, and you start to look into that. They have a headquarters in Washington, D.C., known as the Masonic City. The outside of that building has 33 columns that are each 33 feet tall. Etched on that temple is the phrase, all is number, from Pythagoras. If you study this subject of gematria or gematria, which traces back to Kabbalah, traditionally Jewish mysticism, you find that the Greeks were also into this study, including Pythagoras. They gave it a different name. It's called isopsophy in Greek. But that was my start. And I noticed after 9/11, there were recurring numbers in the news just constantly. And it always bothered me because I was like, why are the same numbers always in the news story? Numbers like 33 and 47. And it took me until I was age 30 to find the answer. And I found an excerpt of Manly P. Hall's The Secret Teachings of All Ages, where he talks about this code of numbers behind the English language. And what had just recently happened in history, I was a school teacher at the time of the Sandy Hook school shooting, and I was reminded of 9/11 when Sandy Hook happened. I was actually working at a private school in Washington State. A lot of the parents there worked at Microsoft, and a lot of stay-at-home parents in those families, and it was amazing. By the end of the school day, the school was nearly empty because there was so much fear on TV that the parents had come and picked up probably, I'd say, about 75% of the students before the school day had even ended. But I noticed when I got home and started watching the news, and it went on for weeks, they would always mention that Adam Lanza, the shooter of Sandy Hook, weighed 112 pounds. And I thought, why does this detail even matter, 112 pounds? I mean, seems like the least important thing they could possibly say, but every news story had to go with it. You can look to this day, you can do a Google search for Adam Lanza, 112 pounds. You'll see that all the media was sure to report on it. And again, it got me looking back into what it was about numbers, and that's when I found the Manly P. Hall passage from, again, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, and he laid out how the most simple cipher of numbers behind the English letters was A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, up to Z is 26. And back then, I did all my research by hand in a notebook. I wrote out the alphabetic order, numbered each letter, and spelled out Sandy Hook, and noticed it added up to 112. And I said, how about that? 112. I looked a little bit more into it. I saw Adam Lanza was born on April 22nd, the 112th day of the year. I started to think about it a little bit more. I thought, his initials, A is the first letter, L is the 12th. His initials are like 112. I noticed they compared it to the Dunblane massacre in the UK, which got gun rights taken away, which was also the targeting of first graders at an elementary school in a shooting. And that shooting happened on a date with 112 numerology. And as we'll get to, that number is also very specific to a certain order that operates in 112 nations, and that's the Jesuits. But anyway, that's the short of how I got into this and how I eventually figured out what I pretty much report on every single day now.
And what you're continuing to unmask is part of the occult spell cast on society. How powerful of an influence are these practices, and how does gematria and numerology play a role?
Sure. Again, it's right in the language. Spells, spelling. If you study Kabbalah, there's a good half and a dark half. And if you're familiar with the Bible, Genesis 3:2-2 mentions the tree of life, knowing good and evil. The tree of life is the physical model for Kabbalah. Again, Kabbalah is where the study of gematria comes from. If you look into the Book of Formation, it's a Kabbalistic text. On the opening page, it says, God created the world with numbers, letters, and words. Anyhow, that passage about knowing good and evil. The good half is commonly studied. The evil half has to do with sorcery. It's known as the clip-off. And again, you start to look into it. It is sorcery through spell casting and involving these very things, including the practice of coding numbers into words. And if you start to pay attention to mainstream media, which every day carries this low vibration, it's so often fear-based, you'll notice that day after day, the stories are numerically encoded. So how powerful is it? Honestly, I couldn't answer that question, but I've always thought society was under a spell. I'm always amazed at how they just march along with the news. 9/11, I was 18 years old at the time, and I thought everybody needed to go back to high school and retake physics because the way the buildings came down didn't make any sense. The latest, pandemic, everything we knew about science just was thrown out the window. All of a sudden, these little cheap masks were the thing to keep us safe from the biological hazard, yet there were no biohazard waste bins anywhere in society. Masks and hand gel everywhere, but no biohazard waste bins. This past week, we can get into a little bit later. They're telling you about the hero cops in Nashville who are storming through a building that's clearly empty. And Again, they broadcast this stuff on TV, and seemingly they don't expect anyone to question it when everything about it should be questioned. So the spell is real, and is it the gematria that has everybody under the spell? Possibly, but I couldn't make that claim. But yeah, I would agree that society is under some kind of spell.
Zach, I wonder about that, if it is the gematria subconsciously programming people. There's something about the numbers, in addition to other factors within the larger hypnosis. But I think the way you've continually peeled back the layers to show your audience the code behind news events, I think it's really important. Now, you started to go into some background on the history of letters and numbers as an occult practice. Can you continue going further back, please?
Okay, so they say this study traces all the way back to Babylon. And from my research, it seems that the system that I'm routinely exposing goes back to the 16th century. Well, let's go back even before the 16th century. They say after the Crusades, the Knights Templar who served the Catholic Church brought this knowledge back to the church in Europe. And again, Kabbalah, the Cabal, they say that's kind of when the Cabal was formed, sometime after the Crusades. And in the 16th century, in response to the Protestant Reformation, the Jesuit order was created, which is the current military order of the Catholic Church. If you look at their logo, it has the Templar cross in the middle of it. But in the 16th century, we got the Gregorian calendar, which we're now on, named after the Pope. And again, the code's very simple. Pope. P is the 16th letter of the alphabetic order. O's the 15th. P's the 16th. E's the 5th. Add up those letters as numbers. Pope equals 52. We have a 52-week calendar named after the Pope. But in the 16th century, you get the Jesuits, and then following the Jesuits by some centuries, or decades, I mean, in the 16th century, the Gregorian calendar rolls out. English is standardized with the 26-letter alphabet we use today and all of the vowels we use today. The heliocentric model is agreed to, which says the sun's at the center of it all. Here we're on this calendar that is largely solar-based, the Catholic Church worshiping on Sunday. Just to make a point about how this really all comes together with the language in the calendar. The Catholic Church, again, all roads lead to Rome. The Catholic Church has celebrated the sun's birthday on December 25th since the year 274 AD. The Jesuit motto, Isus hominum salvator, adds up to 274. 46 years later, the Catholic Church began celebrating Jesus' birthday in the year 320 AD, 46 years later, also on December 25th. Roman Catholic Church has a gematria of 320, so 274 goes back to the sun's birthday on 12/25. 320 goes to Jesus' birthday. That's a difference of 46 years. The word Catholic also has a gematria of 46, which is relevant. Of course, in this nation, JFK, the first Catholic president, was assassinated at age 46. The second Catholic president is Joe Biden, who was elected exactly 46 weeks after the Pope's birthday, something we were screaming out to the world a year before it happened. Of course, Joe Biden also lost his son, Beau Biden, shortly before the election at age 46. But anyhow, in the 16th century, it seems obvious to me that they synced up the language with the calendar, and it paid tribute to history's past. And what I've been tracing is the 16th century forward, pretty much all of world history. Well, I shouldn't say all, but a lot of it, what makes it into his storybooks is by the numbers. And it's very easy to see with the United States of America from the beginning up to the present.
Now, events such as false flags, mass shootings, explosions, attacks on politicians, critical infrastructure, sabotage, sports, as you've pointed out, such as football, soccer, and baseball, all have significant trails of numbers that can be tracked and reduced. Would you tell listeners, please, about your general overview of how you might begin to look at the gematria and numerology for such events?
Gematria, as we talked about, it's as simple as ABC is 1, 2, 3. The most simple code is known as simple English gematria. A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, up to Z, the 26 letters, 26. If you just use the alphabetic order, if you write out simple, it equals 74. If you write out English, it equals 74. If you write out gematria, it's 74. Special number, holiday, equals 74. Kind of like how this nation's birthday is 7-4. The word Masonic is 74. So is the word Jewish, 74. Again, traditionally, this is Jewish knowledge, part of Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah. And Masonry does have a nickname. It's Judaism for the Gentile, and that's because a lot of its teachings are based in the Old Testament of the Bible. But by the way, with regards to the Catholic 46 example I just made, there are 46 books in the Catholic Old Testament. We'll come back to that. But 74 is a very special number. There's a song out there called Gematria, the Killing Name. The word killing adds up to 74 in the most simple cipher. So does stabbing. And the Ides of March is the 74th day of the year to remember the killing of Julius Caesar by stabbing. If you look into this nation's history, 3 of the first 5 U.S. presidents were killed on July 4th. Or in the history books, it doesn't say they were killed, but they died. Jefferson and Adams both died on 7/4, 1826, and then 1826 days later, Monroe died on 7/4. Those were the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th presidents. If you write out the Society of Jesus, it equals 235, and that's the formal title of the Jesuits. 235 is an interesting number because with regards to the Catholic Church originally being a sun cult, those numbers do pertain to the sun. The measurements of the tropics, which measure the solstices, which measure the sun, they're at 23.5 degrees north and south, 23.5, 235. The Masonic compass out of the Scottish Rite of France, they set the compass at 47 degrees, meaning each leg is kicked out 23.5 degrees off center. And for people who don't know, the modern Freemasonry is a Jesuit creation, especially the Scottish Rite. This pattern of 74 just persists all throughout history. In fact, last year, what was the story on July 4th? We had another mass shooting story by the numbers, and it was blamed on a Jewish rapper. Rapper is another word that equates to 74. Fateful number all throughout hip-hop history. I know you do your show in New York. When Notorious B.I.G. died, he died a span of 74 days from his birthday. A number that follows death closely is 74. There's a song out there by the band Slipknot called Gematria, the Killing Name. Again, Gematria and Killing, both 74 in the most simple cipher. The next cipher that you really want to know is the alphabetic order with numerology. If you write out Independence Day, it equals 74 in that cipher. Again, going with how we write our Independence Day, 7/4. I should have also mentioned that in the most simple cipher, in light of all of this going back to Rome and the Catholic Church and the Society of Jesus, who are the Jesuits, just with the most simple cipher, Jesus, cross, Messiah, gospel, parables, they all equal 74. And for people who are not familiar, the gospel is the story of Jesus. Jesus spoke in parables, which are riddles. Okay, so then the next cipher you would want to know is the alphabetic order with numerology. Very important cipher. And then the other half of the code is just running the alphabetic order in reverse. Z is 1 back to A is 26, and running the alphabetic order in reverse with numerology. So you're doing the same thing forwards and backwards. And for example, the word Catholic equals 35 with numerology when you run it forwards, 46 when you run it in reverse with numerology. JFK, number 35, the first Catholic president, killed at age 46. JFK also born on the 149th day of the year, which is the 35th prime. He beat Nixon 305 days after Nixon's birthday. By the way, Richard Nixon equals 74 with numerology, resigned by the numbers in 74. The day that Gerald Ford took over, his birth name from Ford's birthday to the day he took over matched his name gematria. These same types of rituals all throughout history. When Nixon undid the gold standard, he did do that on the Jesuit order's birthday as well, August 15th. Anyhow, Catholic, 35 forwards, 46 in reverse. As we just said, Joe Biden became number 46, elected exactly 46 weeks after the Pope's birthday. He was also inaugurated on the Pope's 35th day of his age. Words like I equal 35 and 46 forwards and backwards, as does Holy See, which is what the Catholic Church rules over. The word I in the most simple cipher. E's the fifth letter, Y's the 25th, E's the fifth. 35. The I went on the dollar bill in 35. And what's written around the I in the pyramid? Words in Latin, the language of Rome. In the Bible, Genesis 3:5 is about the eyes of God. Anyhow, you take this simple code, you just start to see why days are what they are, why this nation's birthday is 7-4. Again, all roads lead to Rome. You run the alphabetic order in reverse, Roman is 74, like the nation's birthday. London, once a Roman stronghold, London 74. So, wanted to make sure that we understand how the ciphers work. Coming back to Catholic, if you run the alphabetic order in reverse, the word Catholic adds up to 145, again with numerology 46. In the Catholic Bible, there's 46 books in the Catholic Old Testament and 145 more chapters. Okay, that's kind of the groundwork for how the gematria works. Gematria is also paired with date numerology in this study. And the big story this week is Donald Trump and the indictment. So, the date that Trump was indicted, March 30th, 2023. One of the paths in date numerology is 3 plus 30 plus 20 plus 23, which adds up to 76, just adding up the date as parts. And in gematria, Donald John Trump equals 76. So does Skull and Bones, 76, the powerful secret society out of Yale. George W. Bush, the last Skull and Bones president, his birthday is July 6, 7-6. As is another famous Skull and Bones member, Daniel Coit Gilman, who founded the Johns Hopkins, and Daniel Coit Gilman also equals 76. But when Trump was indicted, on the 76 date numerology, it was also 76 days before his upcoming birthday, June 14th. And he was indicted for the Stormy Daniels hush money. Well, what day is Stormy Daniels' birthday? March 17th, the 76th day of the year. Her full name in gematria adds up to 383, which is the 76th prime number. Following the Skull and Bones theme, again, most people when they think of Skull and Bones, they think of the number 322. Last week, Trump put out a tweet that he was going to be arrested on March 22nd over this, which was interesting because it wasn't just the date March 22nd, it was also 322 weeks on the nose from him becoming president of the United States, January 20th, 2017. If you're not aware of this already, go out and look at how many times Donald Trump has referenced himself as Batman. Trump has referred to himself as Batman many of times. Last week, the week that he said he was going to be arrested, the New York Post put out a story about how when Trump is indicted, he'll be taken to the same courthouse in Manhattan where they're filming the latest Joker movie. Of course, Joker has to do with Batman. In gematria, Joker equals 76. And what's funny is the last Batman movie, the man who played Batman, Trump's indictment on March 30th was on his 322nd day of his age, 322. And for people who do not know this, if you want to go back and look this up, it's easy to find on the web these days, but the 33rd episode of the original Batman TV series, in that episode, there's a dialogue moment where there's a dinner party and some people are looking at a portrait of Bruce Wayne's grandfather, Batman's grandfather, and they said, "Did you know that Bruce Wayne's grandfather was in Skull and Bones?" And the other person says, "Oh, he wasn't just in Skull and Bones, he founded Skull and Bones." So there's a long documented history with Yale, Skull and Bones, and then you have Trump saying all these years that he's Batman, and there's been a number of rituals up to this point, but this is the biggest one yet. And again, just through understanding this simple little code, you can see how his name equates with Skull and Bones. Again, why the story breaks on the date numerology, why 76 days from his birthday, how it's so perfect with Stormy Daniels. Just before we went on the air, the headline just emerged that Trump is going to turn himself in on April 4th, this coming Tuesday. That's funny because the day that he first tweeted about being arrested was the day after Stormy Daniels' 44th birthday. Donald Trump was number 45, but Grover Cleveland was the first split-term president we had. that he messed the count up. So every president since then has been a number higher than the actual count of people who've been president. So Donald Trump was the 44th person to be president, despite being number 45. But again, he tweeted the day after Stormy Daniels' 44th birthday that he'd be arrested. And now he is going to turn himself in on 4-4. And then that goes back to the Joker thing, because Joaquin Phoenix, who is the Joker in these films and the one that's being filmed right now at the same courthouse, when the Joker film came out in 2019, that's how old Joaquin Phoenix was. He was 44 years old. And later that same month that the movie released, he turned 45, which is funny because, of course, Donald Trump, number 45. Bruce Wayne in Gematria equals 45, who's Batman, and Trump keeps referring to himself as Batman. But yeah, you learn this knowledge, you see through the jokes, and you see that there's a very fine line between Hollywood and what's presented as reality. A lot of people didn't catch it, but back in 2016, when the election was called for Trump, it was in the early hours of November 9th, which was the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And in Gematria, Berlin Wall equals 45 forwards, 63 in reverse, which is interesting because 2016 is the 63rd triangular number. That means if you had 1 through 63, it equals 2016. But Trump, who ran on building a wall, gets called the 45th president-elect on the anniversary of the fall of the wall. And consider that Make America Great Again was Ronald Reagan's campaign slogan. Like Trump, he was an actor and then became a politician. And of course, again, Reagan told Mr. Gorbachev to tear down that wall. Trump said build that wall, but then becomes president-elect on the anniversary of its fall. So again, you learn this news, you just see all the little rituals that they do day after day. They've been syncing Trump up with everything from that to WWE matches to Super Bowl outcomes. And a lot of this stuff we've been able to call in advance. But yeah, I hope I answered your question in that long response.
Zachary Hubbard, who runs the site gematriaeffect.news. Yes, you did answer the question, and I can tell that would keep unraveling and unraveling. There was a shooting event. You had posted a video about a recent one where the shooter had different shoes on in the photographs that were published online. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. And just before I get into that, there was one more thing I needed to say about the Trump Batman thing because it's important. So the latest Batman film that came out, the big climax of the film is on the date November 5th. And that's a very special day to the Jesuits. It's Guy Fawkes Day, the day he tried to blow up British Parliament in history. And just so people know, the Jesuits, again, they're the modern military order of the Catholic Church. That's why they have the Templar cross. We were talking about Skull and Bones with Trump. Skull and Bones gets their symbolism from how the Knights Templar buried their dead in an ossuary. And also the Knights Templar are modeled after, or excuse me, not the Knights Templar, but Skull and Bones is modeled after the secret societies of Bavaria. And of course, the most famous of those is the Illuminati, founded by the Jesuit Adam Weishaupt. So anyhow, November 5th is important that movie ends on that date because the upcoming 2024 election is on November 5th. And Donald Trump, when he took office with the 115th Congress. This is back in 2017. And then he went on the thank you tour. In Gematria, thank you equals 115. In this case, he's in trouble for hush money. Hush money equals 115. And think about that number in light of the date November 5th as we write in the U.S., 115/11/5. Also, he's going to be turning himself in on a Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, exactly 83 weeks before the election. Election equals 83. And sometimes they call Donald Trump the Donald. The Donald is nicknamed the Donald equals 83. 83 is the 23rd prime number. Here we are in 2023. Donald, Joker, Tuesday. They all have the Gematria 23. So again, this entire ritual is synced up with the upcoming election. And then the man who's indicted Trump is Alvin Bragg. Alvin Bragg, Donald Trump, indictment. All three of those words are the exact same in Gematria, forwards and backwards. 48 forwards, 60 in reverse. The upcoming presidential election is the 60th election. So this whole thing is a narrative that will be following all the way up to November 5th, 2024, no doubt about it. If you turned on Fox News the day of the indictment, every host was on the same talking point. This is why you got to come out and support Trump. You got to vote for him in the next election. This is a witch hunt. And with regards to the witch hunt, let's now transition to what you just asked me about, the Nashville shooting, where Sabrina, the teenage witch, was reportedly on the scene, even helping rescue the children. Again, news by the numbers day after day. That was the 86th day of the year that the shooting happened at the Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville is on the 86th meridian west. So a shooting on the 86th day of the year on the 86th meridian west. For the record, that news cycle that day began with the big protest in Israel. The man leading the protest, his name equaled 86 in gematria. The police chief who was in charge of the scene in Nashville, John Drake. John Drake equals 86 in gematria. The woman who owned the school who was reportedly killed, her name in gematria equaled 86. When you think of 86, it's not a very nice number. You think of Hiroshima on 86. It's a number that has to do with death. Words like human sacrifice and blood sacrifice equal 86. Also on that day, the other big news story was all the migrants who burned up in Ciudad Juarez, who essentially got 86th. And for a clear parallel between what happened in Nashville and what happened in Ciudad Juarez, the name of the building where the migrants burned up, the name of that building in gematria added up to 135. They put out 2 body cam videos of the police officers who were supposedly the heroes in Nashville. Both of their names in gematria equaled 135. And the man who got more attention was Rex Engelberger. And if you've seen the news stories, they even talk about how he's Jesuit educated. He went to Loyola Academy in Chicago. Well, both of those stories came exactly 135 days after the Superior General's birthday, Arturo Sosa, born November 12th, 1948. He is the leader of the Jesuit order. And things like this go on day after day. Stories that are perfectly synced with the Superior General and the Pope. The Pope's birthday is 35 days after the Superior General's, December 17th. From his birthday to the shooting was 100 days, and the shooter's name, Audrey Elizabeth Hale, equals 100. And most of the media just referred to her as Audrey Hale, something we've talked about for years. But again, transgender is a real term, and they did refer to Audrey Hale as a transgender shooter. And keep in mind, the week before, Tucker Carlson on his program, a lot of people think this guy's the hero, but he's in on the script as well. He said on his nightly program that he saw in the near future transgender people taking up weapons and creating violent acts in America. Go figure that the next week's news cycle, that's exactly the top story. But there's a number that we call the transgender number. And it's 53. In gematria, transgender equals 53. The name Audrey Hale's 53. The date numerology that day, 3 plus 27 plus 23, 53. Remember when Bruce Jenner, which sounds like gender, posed on the cover of Vanity Fair, 53. So many 53 rituals with the swimmer, whose name is escaping me right now, the college swimmer who dominated women's swimming as a transgender. But we've documented so many 53 transgender stories over the years. It's just it's a mind-blowing list. And if anybody wants to take a moment to look up the first transgender person in the nation's history, her name is escaping me, but if you just do a web search, she'll pop up. You'll see that she was born on May 30th, 530, and died at a relatively young age on May 3rd, 53. And again, just a huge recurring pattern with transgender and 53. So they even give you a transgender shooter on the appropriate date numerology, and then the shooting in the appropriate city. They also said the shooter was 28 years old. And that matters because Joe Biden, he said that this is another reason why we need the assault weapons ban like the one we had in 94. The shooting was exactly 28 weeks from the anniversary of the assault weapons ban. That was September 13th, 94. And funny enough, that assault weapons ban was on the 256th day of the year. An assault weapons ban in gematria equals 256. If you just leave off the ban, assault weapons has gematria of 192. Audrey Hale, their birthday, March 24th, 95, was 192 days after the assault weapons ban of September 13th, 94. September 13th can also be written 13/9, like 139. Gun control equals 139. They had to give you the detail about Audrey Hale driving a Honda Fit, seemingly another not so important detail, but Honda Fit equals 139 like gun control. Again, you follow the patterns, you realize how these same numbers persist again and again in the shootings. Parkland, Florida, a big 139 town, and after the Parkland shooting, we had the March for Our Lives. And actually, I almost want to double check that in real time. I want to say March for Our Lives was actually on March 27th, 2018, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, I take it back. I actually just looked up. It was actually March 24th, 2018. Audrey Hale's birthday is March 24th, funny enough.
That's fascinating. I just want to jump in here for a minute, Zach, to remind you to address the change of shoes. And did that fit into the ritual somehow?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Okay. So, funny enough, Newsweek has put out an article saying that this is just some online nonsense conspiracy theory that's easily debunked. But I would, if anybody lets Newsweek do their thinking for them, I encourage you to look into these things yourself. I've put out a video on it. I have a zoomed-in photo so all can see. They've released two different sets of film. Well, you got the two body cam photos from the videos from the cops. And then you also have the surveillance video from the school. And what all videos confirm is that the school's completely empty. You never see anybody besides police and the shooter anywhere in the video. Every classroom, office, bathroom's completely empty. Nobody's running, making any noise. Anyhow, the shooter comes in the surveillance video, which they put out first, wearing black and white Pumas. You can clearly make out the Puma's stripe. Black and white Pumas. And that video is very HD. It's not blurry at all. You can make it out clearly. Black and white Pumas. And the police body cam footage, they're in Vans, and they are black shoes like the black and white Pumas, and they do have white soles, but they have a red and yellow Van stripe, not a Puma stripe, and it's colored. It's red and yellow. And there's a guy out there, you might know his name, Ole Demigard. His whole thing is it's all about the shoes. He's always pointing out the rituals they do with the shoes in the mass shootings. And of course, shoes does sound like shootings. But what's interesting is in gematria, shoes equals 66. Mass shooting also equals 66. The hero Jesuit cop who went to Loyola Academy, that also equals 66 for the record. And in this case, the shooting was exactly 66 days before the state's birthday, Tennessee, which is June 1st, a date that can be written 1/6, kind of like 16. It is the 16th state, Tennessee. But yeah, exactly 66 days before the birthday. And then in light of the later videos showing Vans, if you actually look up the company Vans, they were established in the year 1966. So I wish instead of them putting out their articles, I'd love to see the Newsweek people put out I feel like that's the society we should live in. Instead of the mainstream media always censoring or YouTube censoring everybody, let's have a debate. Let's have the Newsweek person who wrote that article debate their point that they're the exact same shoes and it's just a difference in the cameras versus let's debate exactly what I'm saying right now. I don't think the Newsweek person's going to win the debate. I think everyone can clearly see one pair of shoes are Pumas and the other ones are Vans, so... Newsweek answered the question, and I don't think it's arbitrary that they had Newsweek take on the point about the shoes because Newsweek was established in the year 1933, emphasis on 33. In gematria, Newsweek equals 33. And the school. The first detail that CNN put out about the school was its address. If you ever follow CNN when a mass shooting breaks, they usually have about one paragraph written, and then it says... breaking news, follow the story that will update as information comes out. But right in the first paragraph, they had to let you know that the school was at 33 Burton Hills Road. And if you go to the school's website, the Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee, you'll see right on their website that they employ 33 teachers. And of course, the detail eventually came out that 3 adults and 3 children were killed. For anyone who follows these patterns, 33 is one of the most overused numbers day after day in news stories. It's like a signature of the propaganda. And again, one of the most important ciphers, arguably the most important cipher, the alphabetic order with the numerology, the words order, secrecy, masonry, federal, police, they all equal 33. And for people who've never noticed before, pay attention to where police stations are and where Masonic lodges are, because all throughout America, they are right next to each other. Across the street, kitty corner, a block apart. I just moved to a small town here in Washington State, Prosser, Washington. The same building has the police station and the Masonic lodge in it. Where I used to live, Bothell, Washington, right across the street, the police station, the Masonic lodge. It's like this all across the country. There's the Fraternal Order of Police is a Masonic organization. So 33, big time number in this shooting as it is in so many more. And then they had to have Newsweek come out and try and debunk the shoe thing that so many people observed with their, in my opinion, silly explanation.
Zach, I suspect you've plugged in keywords to the ciphers to maybe random events, testing for similar numerological outcomes. And I ask because it might be a stretch to have people believe there's a Truman Show-like framework behind the scenes making sure the gematria falls into place. How do you perceive this behind-the-scenes structure?
Okay, so again, it seems that all roads lead to Rome. Again, as we talked about, the knowledge was brought back to the church after the Crusades. Hundreds of years later, in the 16th century, the Jesuits come about. They want to counter the Protestant Reformation. English. By the way, if you look into the oldest English script, it goes back to the year 1011 AD to the monk Burfirth of Ramsey Abbey, also Catholic. But anyhow, it seems that the Catholic Church, again, created the language as we know it, or had the final say-so in it, synced it up with the calendar, and it seems that ever since then, there's been a cabal, some kind of organization that is plotting world affairs. And I imagine as time has gone on, with computers and technology, perhaps even some kind of AI that uses the formula to sort of format the news. Okay, we're going to be in this city today on this meridian because it syncs up in this way. And just like how people in the news today, across all networks, get essentially certain talking points, things, bullet points that have to be in their story, that they're essentially following the script but putting their own little spin on the story. For example, a police department. Really good example of how this could work. Robert Luna was sworn in right at the end of last year as, the chief, where the Lunar New Year Festival shooting happened that was blamed on an older Asian man. So I feel like they have certain assets in place and they get passed down the script and they have to go along with the story and present it to, the news and present it in front of the television cameras as a real type of event. I think the exact same thing's going on in Nashville. I think that they performed the drill at the school, they recorded the drill, they put out the footage of the drill, and then you have Police Chief John Drake on the television screen presenting to the cameras that this was a real tragedy. I feel like there's a centralized source that's writing the scripts, just like how, in the same way that they contrive TV shows, movies, scripts, Law and Order season 5000. I feel like it's the same type of thing for the news. There's actually an old British show, Newsbenders. And if people want to look this up, there's an episode of Newsbenders, and a man is being hired to write the news for 5 years in advance. And the guy who's being hired for this position thinks it's a joke. He's like, "Are you serious? You want me to write the news for 5 years from now?" And he's like, "Well, why are we doing this now?" And the guy who's hiring him laughs and says, "Now?" He's like, "We've been doing this for a long time." And then he kind of goes down history and said, "Do you think this even really happened? Like, what about this story?" So if I'm communicating this correctly, again, a cabal that is essentially the Catholic Church, perhaps even the Vatican, creating stories. They get passed out to various outlets, positions of authority, government officials, police officers in the know. And again, it doesn't have to be, I'm not saying that every police officer in the department would know. We just had an example here. I recently moved, but I lived in the town of Yakima, Washington, small town in Washington State. On the 24th of January, we were the national news story for a mass shooting. The Masonic Lodge in Yakima is Lodge 24. Yakima equals 24. So does the phrase the sun, kind of like how there's 24 hours in a day. Yakima is known as the Sun Valley of Washington. They said that the shooter traveled east on Route 24. As we know, the sun rises in the east. But I actually drove out to the scene of the standoff because they said they were having a standoff at his house. And then I laughed when I got there because the house was on the corner of Elmo Street. A-L-M-O, almost like Alamo. That's what I called it. I called it the standoff at almost Alamo. But then after the standoff that lasted about 8 hours, then it came out that the house was vacant and nobody was home. And then they said that the shooter committed suicide by the target. And I drove over to the target as soon as that detail broke, and there was nothing going on at the target, like how they had all the cops and all their big, militarized vehicles that pretty much every police department in this nation got after 9/11. But yeah, it just seemed like it was a big joke. And then Target shooting, he commits suicide by the Target, yet there's nothing going on over there. So anyway, I feel like it's just that easy for them to get away with it. Just get in front of the cameras, tell the story. Doesn't matter if the story adds up at all, just like how they can put out a completely empty school and tell you that there was some terrible tragedy there as police officers go to room to vacant room. And I mean, you'd think if people were killed in the school and shots were fired, you'd see things broken, scenes of distress, dead bodies, blood, none of that in the video. So anyhow, just putting out the talking points for what they want the people in authority to go to the screen and say for the day. And it doesn't matter if there's no evidence anywhere to support anything they're saying. The people of this world have been trained to believe authority. So if an authority said it, then they'll just believe it automatically. I make the same point. Had I put out a video of myself with a body camera running through an empty school, and then I showed people the footage and I said, look at how I just saved all those children in that school, everyone I would show that footage to would be like, Zach, what are you talking about? The school was empty. I didn't see a single person in that school. But if the news puts it on, that critical analysis goes out the window, and now suddenly the thought process is, well, I mean, there'd have to be too many people in on it. I don't know how you could keep all those people quiet. And all these things are self-explanatory. Money keeps people quiet. The fear of losing a job will keep people quiet. People go to work every day and do corrupt things, all for the sake of maintaining their paycheck. Again, a centralized authority using the power of technology to put out a set of talking points for the day. They get syndicated everywhere, and the talking heads just follow the script. That's the way I see him executing it. And again, perhaps at this day and age, maybe even a computer or some kind of AI is generating the script for the news each day. But no doubt about it, the news is scripted day after day. If you just follow gematria and date numerology, you'll see how the stories line up day after day. The stock market, rigged sports games, it's the same stuff across the board day after day.
Zach Hubbard, would you please talk about the ritual deaths of politicians, celebrities, and musicians who are members of the club? These rituals are often tragic, especially when the club member breaks out of the mind control and becomes non-compliant.
Sure. This is a really long list. I have a book out there, Letters and Numbers, that's nearly 800 pages long, and there's a chapter in that book that's over 150 pages long on celebrity death by the numbers and just showing the same recurring patterns over and over. And something that put my work on the map for a lot of people, in 2016, I had a really good year at growing the work, and that's because I called every sports championship from the start of the season dead on, and I also called the death of Prince before he died. And in light of what you just said, Prince had recently done an interview on the Tavis Smiley show talking about geoengineering, and for anyone who's never seen Prince on Tavis Smiley talking about this, you should listen to it. His theory was that they're spraying different chemicals in the skies above major metropolitan areas to mess with people's emotions. And he said he felt like some days there was just something in the air that was making him feel angry or agitated or irritated. Little bit different take than what most people have on it. But it's just the fact that Prince went on Tavis Smiley, which was a pretty popular show at the time, and spoke so openly about this. So anyhow, Prince, the reason I was able to predict his death was because of the death of Vanity, his girlfriend from the time of his Purple Rain album. Vanity died the day of the 58th Grammys. And in Gematria, Purple Rain equals 58, as does Freemasonry, as does Secret Society, as does Fraternal. It's another big number. Sandy Hook happened on a 58 date numerology. Covenant School, where the Nashville shooting just was, equals 58, and they compared it to Uvalde, and it happened 58 days for the Uvalde anniversary. And it's another special number, is the point to understand, 58. When Donald Trump won the 58th presidential election, he announced he was running from the 58-story Trump Tower. He hired the 58-year-old Steve Ray for Inauguration Day. Hillary put out the book about why she lost, titled What Happened, which equaled 58. But anyway, coming back to Prince. Purple Rain equals 58. Vanity died the day of the 58th Grammys. And what stood out to me was Prince on that album had the song I Would Die For You. And he recorded that song in the year 83. Another song that came out in 83 was on the album Synchronicity by The Police. And that song's called Murder by Numbers. And it's about how killing is the sport of the elected. It's as simple as ABC is 1, 2, 3. The word murder equals 83. So Murder by Numbers came out in 83. Prince's I Would Die For You came out in 83. Prince ended up dying on 4/21, April 21st, the Queen's birthday. 4/21 is for you. He spelled that song. He was way ahead of his time. I mean, he spelled that song like a text message. He spelled it with the number 4 and the letter U. So I would die for you. Number 4, letter U. Use the 21st letter, dies 4/21. Again, I want to make sure that point's real clear. Now, something funny that happened is they lit up Niagara Falls purple the day that Prince died. And a lot of people were confused. They said, wait a minute, how can they already have this tribute with the purple lights this fast on the day Prince dies? And then the media came out and said, oh, no. That's not for Prince. That's for Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth. It was her birthday. For the record, in Gematria, purple equals 88. So does Elizabeth. So does Trump. When Trump came out to Queen, We Are the Champions at his 2016 convention, he got criticized for that, but that was 88 days after Elizabeth's birthday. The movie Joker also came out on the day, leaving 88 days left in the year. But anyhow, them lighting up Niagara Falls purple the day Prince died of Purple Rain, who was dating Vanity at the time, what a lot of people didn't catch is that Vanity is from Niagara Falls. She was a beauty queen winner in Niagara Falls. His death was 67 days from Vanity's death. From her death to his was a span of 67 days. It's another fateful pattern in numbers. In Gematria, blood sacrifice equals 67. So does human sacrifice. Big headline this past week. The death of the drag queen in the UK at age 67. The comedian who just dropped dead unexpectedly. What people didn't catch about that is he died 201 days after the Queen, and the Queen died 201 days after her COVID diagnosis, and a big headline in the UK was the death of Captain Tom, who was known for the Burma campaign, who died the day before Burma's government fell to its military, but he died 201 days after being knighted by the Queen. Again, 201 is a number that traces back to Event 201. We can get into that the next time. If you follow celebrity death patterns, numbers that will come up again and again in their deaths. We talked about 74 at the beginning, and 3 of the first 5 presidents dying on 74. The word killing is 74. That number shows up a lot. Another number that shows up a ton is 83. Murder equals 83. If you do it the small way, murder also equals 38. If you have a minute, look up the movie poster, Murder by Numbers. Just like the Police song, it's the same title. On the cover, they changed the E to the 3 and the B to the 8. No other letters are changed to numbers. 3883, murder 38 and 83, the song out in 83. But you just look through celebrity deaths in history, you'll see how often the same numbers come up. 83, 38, 74, 67. It's over and over. And the same numbers that show up in the celebrity deaths show up in the big ritual killings. Nashville. They said that a survivor of the 7-4 Highland Park killing just happened to be in Nashville that day. And it was exactly 38 weeks after the Nashville shooting. It was also 163 days after the mayor's birthday, which is the 38th prime. With regards to 38 in death, this nation's capital on the 38th parallel north, Washington, D.C., the killing epicenter, if you will, the Pentagon. The word Pentagon is 38. Another word that has to do with 38 in death is pandemic. Anthony Fauci stepped down after 38 years of serving his position at the NIH since the infamous year of 1984. Of course, he's a Jesuit. That Murder by Numbers movie poster, that movie, Sandra Bullock's the big star of the film. Sandra Bullock equals 83. The movie released 38 weeks after her birthday while she was in her 38th year of life. So again, there really are 1,000 celebrity deaths I could get into, but rather than do that, I would encourage the listener out there to go look into the celebrity you think about, and you will likely see the exact numbers that I'm talking about. 38, 67, 74, 83, the date numerology, the distance from the birthday. Over and over, I'm talking about the same things week after week. It really is amazing how fast it all compiles. And just so people understand, when a celebrity dies, it often really hurts people's emotional energy because so many people live vicariously through these celebrities. 38 is a number that connects with all these words: death, murder, killing, RIP. Also, English, gematria, energy. All of these words are 38. This nation's capital is on the 38th parallel, and Pentagon equals 38, and it's responsible for death and killing all over the world. And again, you learn this knowledge, you start to really put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Oh, definitely. And I have a lot more questions to ask. We didn't get to them, but it'd be great to have you back on very soon in the coming weeks, so we'll try to arrange that. If listeners want to catch your broadcast and stay in touch with you, how would they do that?
Sure. I have a website. It's gematriaeffect.news. Gematria is spelled like Gem, G-E-M, and then A-T-R-I-A, Gematria Effect with a E, .news. And then on YouTube, I'm Gematria Effect News. I have the channel number 25, 24, 23, 22. I also have Gematria Effect Sports. The reason I have so many channels is because I'm constantly suspended, and if you're not familiar, if you get 3 strikes within a 3-month period, they delete your channel all the way. I've had that happen to me 20-some times. So now my new trick is to just shuffle channels and wait till the strikes expire so as to keep the work up. But yeah, I really appreciate the interview and the questions, and would love to come back.
And a big thank you to longtime friend Steve White for helping to connect us and get this interview out there.
Thank you, Steve. Indeed. Great man.
Thank you so much, Zach Hubbard with GematriaEffect.news for being on In Other News.
Appreciate it.
That's going to do it for In Other News. I'm Jeff Brady. Visit inothernewsradio.com for archives and more information about the guests.
In other news.
The towers did not burn up. They turned into powder in midair.
It's scary to have this helicopter hovering around.
You walk up to them and confront them. They can't stand that.
Welcome to In Other News. I'm Jeff Brady. We hear part 2 of the interview with numerology expert Zachary Hubbard. In our last interview, we covered some basics of how the English alphabet is coded and using gematria ciphers to decode events through names of cities, people involved, and strangely repeated words in news headlines. The cipher converts the letters into numbers, and those numbers then reveal a pattern. Some numbers repeat, such as 33, 22, 119, 911, 1111, and 201, to name a few. In part 1, we talked about how it might be possible for an artificial intelligence, maybe a quantum computer, to load all potential coded events by processing the data within a template of the ancient practice of astrology, numerology, and sacred geometry. A list of potential events to be staged could be generated each month or year with varying order of intensity to be sorted out. For the past 20 years, our guest, Zachary Hubbard, has been studying the effects of this occult practice that gives us a glimpse into the larger elements embedded into the fabric of modern human culture. Zach Hubbard has learned to decode this matrix spell, and he's been teaching those who want to learn through social media and his site, gematriaeffect.news. He's the author of Number Games, 9/11 to Coronavirus, and Letters and Numbers, How English's Numerical Code Reveals the Scripting of History, Election, Rigged Sports, and more. Zach Hubbard, welcome back to Another News.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. This is part 2, and there are numbers that show up repeatedly, such as 33, 119, 201, and 106. Many listeners at this point are familiar with Event 201, hosted by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security in partnership with the World Economic Forum. From their site, it's described as a 3.5-hour pandemic tabletop exercise that simulated a series of dramatic, scenario-based, facilitated discussions confronting difficult, true-to-life dilemmas associated with response to a hypothetical but scientifically plausible pandemic. And as in many false flag events, this simulation occurred in October 2019, months prior to the official announcement of the engineered pandemic. And interestingly, as an aside, according to the National Herald in India, Bill Gates is denying a simulated exercise ever occurred. But would you please talk about these numbers that keep showing up in the cipher, starting with 201?
So 201 is a very special number to the Jesuit order. And the main host of Event 201 was actually Klaus Schwab. A lot of people are familiar with that name, the leader of the World Economic Forum, who is Jesuit educated. The reason you can tell that the number 201 is important to the Jesuits is because we're living in the time of the first Jesuit pope, Pope Francis, and he's also the first pope to ever live in Suite 201 at the Vatican. And if you dig into the Jesuit history, you'll find that their order was preserved in the time of their suppression by Catherine the Great, the leader of Russia, and their official history is that she preserved the order with 201 Jesuit priests. And as we got into the last time I was on your show, we talked about gematria, the Kabbalistic practice of coding numbers into words, which is as simple as A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, up to Z, the 26 letters, 26. If you write out the name of the Jesuit founder, Ignatius of Loyola, the letters of his name add up to 201. And if you add up the letters of Pope Francis's birth name, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, his name adds up to 201. In gematria, you can also run the alphabetic order in reverse. Z is 1 back to A is 26. If you do that, the Jesuit order equals 201. And this number is very relevant all throughout their history. We're coming up on the anniversary of April 19th, the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing in 95, and that event was blamed on Timothy McVeigh. First of all, April 19th is the day in history that Ignatius of Loyola became the first superior general of the Jesuits. The name Timothy McVeigh has gematria of 201. For people who aren't aware, the brother of the governor of Oklahoma City, well, the governor at the time was Keating, who was Jesuit educated like Bill Clinton. They both went to Georgetown. But the brother of the governor at the time wrote a book called The Final Jihad. I'd encourage anybody to look up this book. It's almost as thick as the Bible. And in the book, there's a character named Tom McVeigh that blows up the same building with a moving truck loaded with fertilizer. And the publishing date was very close to the time of the incident. And it's obvious it took him a long time to write because it's a very big book. But it's a major league coincidence. In addition to Timothy McVeigh equaling 201, so does Terry Lynn Nichols, 201. And Richard Snell also equals 201. He was executed by the state of Oklahoma the day the Oklahoma City bombing happened. And what he was executed for was attempting to carry out a plot to blow up the same building in 1983. Timothy McVeigh was sentenced to death on June 13th, the day leaving 201 days left in the year. And funny enough, capital punishment also has gematria of 201. And so does the word triclavianism, which is the old Roman form of capital punishment. And if you're familiar with the Jesuits' logo, it is the sun with the letters IHS and 3 nails, which represents triclavianism, crucifying people with 3 9-inch nails. So again, this 201 number, very important to the Jesuit order, and it's a number you'll find around rituals that you could say are meant to inspire fear, from Event 201, a coronavirus pandemic simulation, to say a September 11th, 2001, where 2 towers became 0 before they eventually became 1. If you look into the Jesuit motto at Georgetown, it is both into one, kind of like 201. And the idea of it is, taking competing ideas and merging it into one system, which might remind you of one world order or a new world order. And again, the Jesuits do serve the Catholic Church. Might make you think of the New Testament. But this 201, it's such a massive number. The first major gun control legislation in this nation's history came 201 days after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., who again was killed on the anniversary of Martin Luther becoming a Catholic priest who later resented the church and led the Protestant Reformation against the church. And again, he wrote the 95 Theses only to be killed on the 95th day of 1968, 3 days before the Club of Rome was established. This 201 number in shootings, it's happened a lot. Last year you had the Buffalo Tops shooting, 201 days after Hillary Clinton's birthday, who's also Jesuit educated. Why measure from Hillary's birthday? Well, because she cut the ribbon when they opened that store in Buffalo, New York, which was a big political story because of how that neighborhood had been cut off from having a grocery store by the construction of Interstate 33, which runs through there. You had the Uvalde shooting 10 days after Buffalo, which was 201 days after Matthew McConaughey's birthday. He went to the White House and held up green Converse, which happens to have gematria of 201, in the time of Joe Biden, whose Secret Service name is Celtic. And for people who missed it, Joe Biden, the day he announced he was running for president, John Havlicek of the Celtics dropped dead 17 days after his birthday, kind of like how he wore the number 17 and NBA equals 17 in gematria. But Joe Biden, who's Jesuit educated, who's from Scranton, Pennsylvania, that's where The Office, the hit TV show on NBC set that ran 201 episodes, and in nearly every episode you see the Jesuit prep school's flag in the episode. Donald Trump, who's also Jesuit educated, he buried his wife last year on the 201st day of the year. They once had their first child together, Donald Jr., on the 201st day of Trump's age. With regards to, what's happened that's taken over the world stage since COVID after Event 201 was Russia-Ukraine. And if you go back and look at the timeline, you'll see that Joe Biden went to the European Union, which happens to equal 201, the European Union, 201 days after his own birthday, and warned Russia not to invade Ukraine. And then later that year, Biden and Putin met on Pearl Harbor Day of all days, December 7th, which was 201 days after the first Jesuit Ignatian year ever began. The first Jesuit Ignatian year began May 20th, 2021, and went through July 31st, 2022. May 20th is the day in history Ignatius of Loyola was shot with a cannonball. July 31st is the day in history that he died. So it ran more than a typical calendar year, but they did that for the 500th anniversary of him being shot with a cannonball. 201 days after the first ever Jesuit Ignatian year began, Joe Biden met with Putin about not invading Ukraine. And then when they did invade, they invaded the Donbass region, which equals 201 in gematria. And then, funny enough, 1 year to the day of Biden warning Putin not to go into Ukraine, which again was 201 days after Biden's birthday, the headline for the world was Russia officially takes over Donbass region. And again, the 201s are nonstop. I've just given you a short list. Here we are this week with another mass shooting in Louisville, and the district representative, Gerald Neal, for where the shooting happened, District 33, he was on his 201st day of his age. And the current governor, Andy Beshear, his father was once the lieutenant governor of Kentucky. It also happened 201 days after his birthday. And funny enough, he was the 49th lieutenant governor, whereas the current mayor's 49 years old. The day of the shooting, they were going with the headline, 4 dead, 9 injured. The shooting came 49 days after Mitch McConnell's age, and that's just another recurring pattern. Gun control equals 49. At the beginning of the stream, you brought up 33. Again, it happened in District 33 at Building 333, exactly 33 weeks after the mayor's birthday. And like you said, you just learn some of these numbers. You'll see how repetitive they are in terms of how they're ritualistically used to create what we call the news, which ends up shaping our, maybe I should say our, because it might not shape your, in my opinion, because we see through the propaganda, but for the masses who don't see it, it's these stories, these encoded stories that end up shaping their worldview and then their behavior and then the agendas that they march along to. But again, what I'm trying to get people to realize is that you can see through the ritualism if you learn the numbers and their meaning and what societies and orders they belong to. Again, in the case of 33, words like masonry, order, secrecy, federal, police. In Louisville, the shootings in District 33, exactly 33 weeks after the mayor's birthday, at Building 333. Last time I spoke to you, we were talking about Nashville, where the shooting was at building number 33, where 33 teachers were employed, and it was 3 adults, 3 children killed. We're just a day past the anniversary of the New York subway shooting of last year, where they said 33 shots were fired. And again, it was an Underground Railroad shooting on the anniversary of the start of the American Civil War. It seems like every year they have a racial joke on that day, April 12th. They blamed it on an older black man, the subway shooting where the cameras just happened to be out. This year, sadly, what happened is a former basketball star for the LSU Tigers dropped dead on the 102nd day of the year, right after the women's LSU team just won the championship with 102 points. And in gematria, slavery equals 102. Thus why the American Civil War, which had a lot to do with slavery, began on the 102nd day of the year, when news is contrived by the numbers. And it goes back to what Lincoln said. Lincoln said that without the sinister influence of the Jesuits, there never would have been an American Civil War. And Confederate, when you run the alphabetic order in reverse, the word Confederate is 201. It's a reminder, January 6th, 2021, we had the insurrection, as they called it. And that happened exactly 201 days after the only Confederate statue in Washington, D.C. fell. That was of Albert Pike, which fell on June 19th or Juneteenth. The reason that statue came down was because of the protests after the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And if you're not aware, in Paris, France, which is the original home of the Jesuits, think about how the first Jesuit pope is Pope Francis, when the Jesuits are from Paris, France. But in Paris, France, you had the killing of Adama Traoré, July 19th, 2016, which was the 201st day of the leap year. George Floyd was killed exactly 201 weeks later. His name in gematria, George Perry Floyd, equals 201. His killing was compared to Michael Brown's, whose name also equaled 201, who was killed in St. Louis, next to the Jesuit University, St. Louis University Jesuit School. Black Lives Matter is the new movement these days. Once upon a time, it was the Black Panther Party, and if you look into the history of the Black Panther Party, all of their original meetings were in Catholic churches in the Bay Area. So, and I mean, you think about George Floyd in the Twin Cities, well, the other Twin City is St. Paul. To show you how Catholic it was with George Floyd, he was pulled out of a Mercedes-Benz ML320 and killed in front of police cruiser 320. Roman Catholic Church equals 320, and why that number is significant to them is because they've celebrated the birthday of Jesus since 320 AD on Christmas Day. For the record, they've celebrated the sun in the sky's birthday on that day since 274 AD, and their Jesuit motto, Isus Hominum Salvator, equals 274 forwards. If you run it in reverse, the motto equals 266, like how Pope Francis is the 266th Pope and the first Jesuit. And that is a difference of 46 years between 274 AD and 320. 46 years where Catholics 46, kind of like Joe Biden, number 46, elected 46 weeks after the Pope's birthday, after he lost his son Beau Biden at age 46. And for the record, when Beau Biden died, he died 201 days before the Pope's birthday, Pope Francis, the first to live in Suite 201. And the Jesuit priest who did the funeral for Beau Biden at age 46 did the inauguration for Joe Biden as number 46 on January 20th, a date written 20/1, like 201 in the majority of the world, which also happens to be the 201st day of the U.S.'s age each year, if you measure from July 4th. The Jesuit priest and former head of Georgetown who did the funeral and inauguration, his name, Leo Jeremiah O'Donovan, equals 201. The 201, it's deep. If you look into the establishment of the CIA, September 18th, 1947, it was established on the Pope's 201st day of his age, the sitting Pope at the time, Pope Pius. And the words in the CIA's logo, Central Intelligence Agency, United States of America, equal 201. And to be clear, gematria, there's 4 ciphers you want to know. The alphabetic order in reverse, as we discussed, and then both orders using numerology. So each letter is compressed to a single-digit number. So A would still be the first letter. Z, the 26th letter, when you use numerology, becomes 2 plus 6 is 8. So you just make each letter a single-digit number. Y, the 25th letter, would be 2 plus 5 is 7. But if you write out Central Intelligence Agency, United States of America, the words in its logo, it's 201. And their motto, which is the work of a nation, the center of intelligence, also equals 201 when you just run the alphabetic order in reverse and use numerology. And that 201 number, it really does go back to the beginning of the nation. James Madison, who wrote the Constitution, 201. Chief Justice John Jay, the first Supreme Court head justice, 201. I could get into what they did with overturning Roe versus Wade in the past year, the name of the case, 201, and it just goes on and on and on. Ketanji Brown Jackson made the nominee 201 days from her birthday after Breyer, who she replaced, announced he was retiring 201 days from his birthday. And funny enough, he also has the same August 15th birthday as the Jesuit order. Once you're aware of it, if you just pay attention, you measure from birthdays. Ritual after ritual, this number showing up. I've been trying to get the knowledge of 201 into a 50-page book for about 2.5 years, or just a really condensed, information-packed read, and I have not been able to pull it off because as I'm doing it, there's always just some news story that just happened. I'm just like, I feel like this one. So it's been this never-ending project to try and figure out how to write the 50-page book about 201, and really it's a book that needs to be about 2,001 pages. So it might end up being that instead of my plan of a 50-page book, but this 201 number shows you, again, the society that is behind the manipulation of the minds in this nation, from 9/11 to pretty much all the mass shootings to things like COVID, and the list goes on.
Thank you for going into detail there, Zach Hubbard. And 201, I would say the fact that it just keeps coming up again and again while you're writing the book is a good sign. I think that's a good sign. Could you please tell listeners what type of interference you've encountered, such as visits from the government or strange people at your live events, especially because you're talking to a lot of people about this topic?
Sure. So, again, as I talk about this, I wouldn't want anyone to hear this and think like, oh, well, that's going to be the reason that I don't speak out, because I don't want that to happen in my life. Because, fear is controlling a lot of people, and it's already keeping a lot of people from speaking out. But I will share some of these things that have happened to me, and it could deter you from speaking out, which, again, I really hope it doesn't. But at the same time, I'd like you to realize that I've been dealing with these kind of things for a long time, and I'm still here, and I'm still speaking out, and it has caused some problems in my life. Again, so many people think that if they speak out, they're going to die or they're going to be assassinated. Again, I'm not sure that's the case unless you've signed on the line with one of these gangs and gone against your oath. But anyhow, here's the kind of stuff I've had to deal with. So I've been speaking out. Well, I've been speaking out since I was 18 years old where I could, but I've been doing this work, exposing this knowledge and code since 2013. And I found myself with my first bit of trouble about a year into the research. There was a mass shooting in the national news at Marysville-Pilchuck High School in 2014, which is just north of Seattle, which is where I was living at the time. It was about a 20-mile drive from my house. I was living in Bothell, Washington at the time, if you're familiar. Suburb of Seattle. Right away in the news, the thing they were reporting at the time is that the shooter was a football player, and he wore the number 33, and he had a fascination with the number 33, and I just thought, oh boy, here we go again with the same old numbers, which we've talked about 1,000 times since. But I went up to the school to see if I could get any kind of answers, and when I got up to the school, it was taped off, and there were police on the perimeter with their cars and police standing around. You know, I was trying to get some information, and nobody had any information. It's an ongoing investigation. At the time, I had my own business. It was a medical marijuana delivery business, and it was just days later where I had a really strange thing happen. I was driving to a delivery in Kirkland, Washington. Again, I live in Bothell. Had a big shop, had a big grow on the property, so we were running a lot of the business out of my property. But on the way to a customer in Kirkland, I had a black SUV. This is nighttime. I was driving on a 25-mile-per-hour road, one lane each way, and I was near the customer's home, and the SUV drove in the opposite direction lane past me, probably drove 100 feet ahead of me, and then slammed on the brakes and just stopped in the middle of the road. And I didn't know what to think. I didn't know if it was, some kid who had his parents' car and was just messing around. And so I drove up slowly behind it and then waited there, but it wasn't moving. So I tried to drive around the SUV. And when I did that, it just pulled ahead and drove further up the road and then hit the brakes again. I thought, okay, they're playing some kind of game. So once again, I tried to pass, and this time they drove, and where they drove to was my customer's house, and they parked right in front of my customer's house before I could get there. So I was like, well, wait a minute, is my customer messing with me? And I noticed nobody got out of the SUV, so I called my customer to see what was going on, if he knew anything, and he said no. He said, you want me to come out there and deal with it? I said, no, I don't want you to come out here. I got out and went up to his door and made the delivery and talked to him for a little bit like I always did. And when I came back out to go back to my vehicle, the SUV just peeled out and went flying off down the road, and I don't know where it drove to. But I had some more deliveries, and then when I got back to my house that night, my house on the side of it had an RV park. I never had an RV, but the previous owner did, and it had a double-door gate, and I always just kept it closed and had kind of a metal stake on both sides to keep the doors shut so they didn't blow open with wind. And it never came open. I mean, I didn't have really a reason to open that gate. But when I got home, they were both all the way open and pushed back. Somebody had plugged in an old microwave into the side outlet, which also kind of gave me the creeps because I was thinking, what is this? I hope this isn't a bomb. I called up my buddy who didn't live too far away, and I just said, hey, I had this weird thing happen when I was out on the road tonight. Now I get back to my house, and the gate's open. I said, will you just stay on the phone with me? It's probably about 11:30 at night that I'm getting home. So I had him stay on the phone while I just walked around to see if any doors or windows were open. And then he didn't think I should open the microwave, but I said, I'm just going to do it. And I opened it, and it was nothing. It was just like, that was November 8th, the day that happened. And it was shortly after I just visited Marysville-Pilchuck to see about the shooting. Again, I didn't get any information. Nobody talked to me. But it was exactly 7 days later, November 15th, that I came home and my front door was kicked open and my house had been raided. And everything of value had been taken. A lot of things were broken and trashed and flipped over, and the place was a total wreck. The grow was sabotaged. Everything of value was taken. It was, I don't even want to talk about how much money I lost that day. You couldn't deposit money from the cannabis business, so we had a safe, and the safe was taken out of the house. It's like a moving team had come through. anyhow, never had any problems like this with the business, which had been operating for a good long while, until just shortly after going to investigate Marysville Pilchuck. So I still think to this day that what happened with that had everything to do with me going and getting somewhat involved with trying to get to the bottom of what was really going on with the shooting. Since then, I've dealt with a lot of things, just weird stuff sent to my mailbox. As you mentioned, August 21st, 18, which was years later, it was after I moved. I moved out to Yakima, Washington. My significant other was going to school out here, so we moved to Yakima, and it was a month after we had moved out here. We had the FBI come to our door, and when they came, they asked if they knew why they were at my place, and I said, I imagine it has something to do with the work I do online, but I don't know why you're here. And they said, well, it's because of something you said. And I said, well, what did I say? And they said, well, here's what you said. They said, you quoted in one of your uploads on YouTube, let's get all of the guns and kill all of the Jews. And I laughed at them and I said, I've never said that in my life. And they said, oh, I have the proof right here. And I said, well, then show me the proof, because I know I've never said that. So he had his cell phone with him, and he was flipping through his phone. He said, man, I had it on here. He said, I might have left it at the office, and he kept playing with his phone for a while. Eventually, he said, oh, I thought I had it on the phone, but I guess not. He said, I'm going to go back to the office, and then I'm going to bring it to you because you did say it. And I said, okay. I said, I don't expect you to come back. Well, he did not come back, but he did send me an email later that night, and he emailed me a video that I had put up in 2017, more than about a year and 3 months before they came to my door. What I said in the video is, I said, let's use our Second Amendment rights, and I said, let's burn this federal capitol to the ground, and I explained that, it's just a source of terrorism. I said, I always remind people that the original definition of terrorism is government by intimidation, and that's exactly what we have for a government in this nation. But yeah, they totally distorted what I said, which was about taking down the federal city, and turned it into something anti-Semitic, which I never said, and thus why he could not produce the proof that I ever said that. But it really felt that they came to the house just to intimidate, and in the months before that, I had not been uploading to YouTube. It was the only time where there was months that I was not uploading to YouTube. And what had happened is, for people who are not familiar, if you have a YouTube account, you have to use a phone number to be able to upload videos that are longer than 15 minutes or to do live streaming. And it allows you to make about 3 accounts per phone number. And I happen to pay for my phone, my significant other's phone, my dad's phone, my mom's phone. So I had all these different phone numbers to use for accounts, and I've gone through a lot of accounts because I get deleted and censored all the time. Just in the last 2 days, I've had 2 of my channels suspended for content that was from 2021, which is something Google likes to do, just suspend you for videos that have been existing for 2 years. Again, I had not been able to upload because at the time I didn't feel like paying for another phone line. And when I moved to Yakima, we did get a different phone line for the house, so then I had a new number. So I hadn't been posting online for about 3 months, and then within weeks of getting the new account set up and posting again on Yakima, I got the FBI knocking at my door. The other thing that was funny about the day the FBI came to my house, if you look up where the FBI office is in Yakima, which is a small town in central Washington, it's very close to where the head school district office is. And I am a certified school teacher, and that used to be my profession. And I was thinking about getting back into teaching, and I'd been offered a job at a middle school in Yakima when we first moved there. And then I got a letter in the mail a couple weeks after the job offer, rescinding the offer, and the letter said that I was not eligible for employment in the district. And I couldn't get a response back, but then finally I got a meeting with the head of the school district. And I had actually just had the meeting that day, and they told me that the reason that I couldn't be hired was because of things I had said in videos online, which is sad because the way I say it, all I've ever done is speak truth to power and really information that children should have so they can see what kind of nation they're really living in. It was shortly after I got back from that meeting with the head of the school district that I had the FBI come to my house. So I kind of felt like those things were connected as well. And other things that have happened over the years. Christmas Eve 2016, before the FBI thing, when I was still living in Bothell, Another YouTuber, I won't even say their name because they've caused a lot of problems in my life. They put out a threat for me and told me to watch out for Christmas Eve 2016. Something about, I better look out for my numbers that day. And I happened to be 33 years old at the time then. And what ended up happening on Christmas Eve 2016 was I had a car crash through 2 walls of my house. And it caused a massive nightmare. And then I got to deal with insurance for about 5 months before we finally reached a settlement. And I still ended up having to pay for over $10,000 of the damage. To this day, I don't think that was an accident, that happened on Christmas Eve.
There was one incident that you referenced where somebody came up to you and gave you an envelope. Can you talk about that?
Last year, I went to Oklahoma City for the anniversary of the bombing, and I got into town a few days before. I actually got into town April 15th. It was Jackie Robinson Day, now that I think about it. I wanted to go to the Oklahoma City Bombing Museum. As I was approaching the front door, a security guard came up to me. I didn't even make it into the building, and I didn't have my phone out. I wasn't doing anything. I was just walking up to the building. And he asked if I was Zachary Hubbard, and I said yes. And he immediately put his hands on me and was shoving me in the backwards direction, saying I need to get off the property. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I said, you don't need to put hands on. And I wanted an explanation for what was going on. And then he got on his radio, and then more security came, and then a bigger guy came who was even more hands-on. And the guy who was shoving me at first was about the same size, so he couldn't push me that well. But then they brought out a bigger guy who could shove me. And anyway, he just said their boss had said that, to be on the lookout for me, and when I came, to make sure I wasn't allowed on the premises. I think it was the next day. In the days leading up to April 19th, I was just, out on the street, making videos, just documenting things, talking about the By the way, we were talking about 201. If anyone wants to look this up, there's a Masonic lodge directly behind the memorial where the bombing happened, and it shows that the last time it sold, the building sold for $201,000. Go figure. Again, I was talking about all the 201s in the Oklahoma City bombing on Ignatius Loyola Day. But I didn't realize that until I got there. So I was doing research like that just around the building and documenting things. Oh, I was actually talking to another young guy who came out there to meet me, and he just stuck a manila envelope in my chest. And I opened it up, and I read it, and it was some threatening thing about how I'd be arrested if I used any loudspeaker or megaphone to educate people about the stuff I talk about. What was funny is the Oklahoma City police, they came out. I called them myself. I wanted them to take a look at this letter because the guy walked in the direction. There's a federal building now, kitty corner from where the museum is, and the guy who did that, he walked kitty corner towards that building, and I think he went in there. But I called up the police and had them look at it and asked if it was true that if I used a speaker to educate, which was the plan. That's what I do. For people who don't know, that's what I do. I go to cities and I speak out and try and wake people up to what's going on. I was just doing it in Seattle just the other weekend, and the video's already been taken down by YouTube. Go figure. But I called the police and asked them about what the information, the thing he printed out with all the laws and highlighted sections, and I had the police look at it, and they said, yeah, we will arrest you. So I thought, wow. And that's weird because, there's never been a city before where I wasn't able to speak out or threatened to being arrested just for using a loudspeaker. But then what was frustrating is when I got back to my hotel, each day I had just been walking from my hotel to the memorial. It was about a mile and a half walk. When I got back to my car at the hotel, I don't know if it was the same guy, but if it wasn't the same guy, it was part of the same thing because they put the same type of manila envelope with the same piece of paper inside, and they put it on my windshield of my car, which means they found out where I was staying and what car was mine. But not only did they put it under the windshield wiper, and this is what made me doubt it. I was like, are these the feds or is this something else? They keyed the hood of my car so bad, just all over the place. And if that's the feds, it's like, God, even keying my car? But yeah, that did also happen last year. And then, like I said, there's been other things, but I try to forget about the negative stuff because my significant other over the years, she's gotten really frustrated. And actually, when the FBI came to my house, she begged me to stop doing this. Anyway, I refuse to quit because I can't stand watching these tyrants get away with the stuff they get away with each day. And I feel like if they scare me out of the mission, then, I just feel like that's not what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to get intimidated and give up.
Right, indeed. And the other aspect here is that it's confirmation in a way that you're over the target for sure. Well, Zach, there are times when the corporate-owned media output of bizarre negative stories reaches an artificial fever pitch. And you know that's designed to destabilize the population. The events such as a mass shooting or major catastrophe had in the past defined a generation or at least a year. There was a time for a band to write, produce, and distribute the song Ohio, for example, about the Kent State University murders in 1970. Now the flow out of the corporate media is a rapid-fire psychological assault. What are your thoughts about the strength of these nefarious events that fall in line with multiple coded patterns, which are then forced on a population and filtered through the consciousness of millions? And how, in your view, can decoding events through numerology provide useful insight for actionable resistance against tyranny?
Yeah. Again, I come back to just the language. Words like spells, spelling. We use the word spelling to describe the forming of words, and then spells relates to magic. And I think I touched on this in our last stream, but the dark half of Kabbalah, where gematria comes from, is the Qliphoth, which is about sorcery and spell casting and having influence over others. But by the way, just to throw this in there, if anybody is not familiar with Hermeticism, there's 7 Hermetic principles, and I really think everybody should read the 7 Hermetic principles. They're short, but they're profound. They're statements that you can read in a matter of minutes, but they're things you can think about for the rest of your lifetime. And one of the Hermetic principles is essentially about that there's one of two things happening. You're either being influenced or you're doing the influencing. And the majority of our society is constantly being influenced. And the majority of us are being influenced at this day and age through screens. We're hearing the same stories, the same talking points. From all these different sources, we're getting the same ideas in our head. We're being told that we're only good citizens if we all act in this way uniformly. I mean, in the time of the pandemic, we were all told we were bad people. We weren't true adults if we weren't getting vaccinated. I think Gavin Newsom said, if you're not vaccinated, you're the same as a drunk driver who puts everyone at risk. Again, another Jesuit. But there is a cabal that is attempting to control our minds. What I do know is from teaching this information, there's a lot of people who completely just dismiss it and will not listen because the training from the school system, from the government for all these years, the indoctrination, they just won't hear it. But at the same time, there are other people who found the work and said, wow, these redundant patterns do show me that there's an agenda, and I can see who the agenda is coming from, and now I can see who's trying to control me. And I continue to put out the work for all the people like that who can be reached. Once upon a time, I read Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point, and it's been years since I read it, but I remember he makes a point about a 20% threshold, that if you can get 20% of a group of people to come to an understanding, that 20% then influences, I forget what the next percentage is, but the next 40% who are in a position where, again, their minds can be changed, and from that 20%, you can essentially turn a group to have a different type of majority opinion. And I don't know if that's exactly true or not, but I just remember reading that, and it's kind of given me hope. And it's kind of the strategy I continue to work with, that if we can get a critical mass, even if it is a minority, to really understand that something's going on in the world, that group could then spread it to the larger population, and then maybe eventually we can overcome what's taking place in our society right now, where essentially everybody's being controlled by the fearmongers who control the screens.
So you're saying awareness will then lead to an insight, and then there's actionable resistance against tyranny?
That's what I'm hoping. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I was curious about a bigger picture of your efforts and what you're thinking people will do with this information after having it really seep into their subconscious, and they can't look at the television or hear any kind of media without seeing through the numerology, basically. This wave of information that springs from one event, such as a bank collapse or food manufacturer fire, can overwhelm a person because it may have multiple connections and repeating numerology, tracking back to numbers, symbolizing the same perpetrators. What are your thoughts on this information causing some to have emotional or psychological problems processing this data?
Do you mean that in the way that somebody, that for all their life they've been believing in the American system, and then the government's looking out for them, and the news media has their best interests, and then all of a sudden they found this new set of information that's making them go, well, wait a minute, are they actually attempting to manipulate me and essentially use and abuse me? Is that how you mean that?
I do, but I think, as you pointed out in the Malcolm Gladwell example, that you're going to reach a certain percentage, and of course it will not be 100% or near that, but you will reach people who may be overwhelmed with this and may not be able to process that. I'm sure that at times you will be bombarded with multiple stories, and you'll see all the connections at this point, and you back away, and you're like, wait a minute, this is insane. Look what they're doing now. Just some basic emotional and psychological problems, maybe with some of your viewers. Nothing major, but I'm sure it does cause some kind of intensity when they're processing it.
Sure. I recently had a conversation with a gentleman, and he told me a story about a lot of people found my work through Kobe Bryant. And by the way, before I answer the question, just to throw some more 201s at you, you might recall Kobe Bryant died right after coronavirus was confirmed in the U.S., the first case outside of China. And Kobe Bryant was buried in Corona del Mar as we were starting to get the headlines about coronavirus. And funny enough, from his birthday, August 23rd, to the day they declared the pandemic, was 201 days later. And you might recall also before Kobe's death, the other big story out of Southern California was on the 4th of July, we had the massive earthquake in that region where the epicenter was on the military base, China Lake. And from the day of that earthquake to the first day the first case of coronavirus being confirmed in the U.S., that was also 201 days later. But anyway, coming back to what you actually asked me, a gentleman recently revealed to me that, he was sound asleep until he found my work on Kobe Bryant dying at age 41 on the Pope's 41st day of his age while traveling from Catholic Mass. Again, in Gematria, Kobe Bryant equals 41. Big number with his career. But he said it made him suicidal. And he said he actually, because his whole worldview was just thrown upside down, and he realized that there was like this evil force and sports were rigged, and he'd been believing it. He said he actually made a suicide attempt, but it failed. He tried to take a bunch of pills, and luckily somebody got to him and he got a stomach poke. But it just, listening to that made me feel sad, and I just wondered how many other stories there might be like that from people who found my work, and it flipped their reality upside down. And I realized, that's a traumatic thing, obviously, for a lot of people to go through. I've heard similar stories, not quite as extreme. It is something to be mindful of, because, again, I'm not trying to make people suicidal. It's just, for me, it's just like, it's hard for me to imagine that happens to people, because I guess from a young age, I've always questioned everything, and I've had my doubts about authorities for all of my life, and always had a problem with authority. But yeah, I guess there are certain people that they really need to be, they need, rather than just a red pill swallowed hard, if you will, they need more of a gentle massaging. And people really do have worldviews. It can cause an adverse reaction to have your whole paradigm changed. So
that in particular, it could connect with an interference or perceived interference to your own free will, as if something's pre-written, pre-scripted, and you can't do anything about it. the depression or anxiety, learning about numerology and a scripted reality, and everything is written out, and you are unwittingly following something that's already drawn out for you, but you don't realize it.
I say yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to find out that you're living out kind of a script. People will ask me that a lot. If I think that there is free will. I do think that there's free will. And like I tell people, we're living in a matrix, if you will, but it's being contrived and controlled by a cabal. And if that cabal was destroyed, I think a lot of, without the cabal, I don't think we had a COVID pandemic in 2020. I don't think the towers came down on 9/11. I don't think we have nonstop. For people, I'd also like people to understand that the reason I really do this is to try and wake up the younger generations, because I always think about what it is to be a child at this day and age. I mean, imagine being a child where you're so impressionable, where you are taught to believe in all the authorities, and you're going to school thinking you could get shot any day. You can die from COVID. There's just so much fear in the world right now. It's like the fear meter is through the roof. And, when you and I were growing up, it wasn't a mass shooting every week in school. And, there weren't any pandemics anywhere near, the level of fear that we saw with COVID. And again, this generation right now that's so young, in a matter of time, they're going to be the adults in the voting class, and they're going to have been trained their whole life to vote away their rights and liberties to be kept safe. That's the norm. Yeah, free will. I do think we have free will, but I realize a lot of people start to question their free will from coming across this research. Instead of that being the reaction and thought, I'd like for more people to think like, okay, I see that there's this agenda and I don't like it, and I want to figure out how to get my fellow people to see it, and let's all do something about it, and let's come up with the best idea for how to do something about it. So that's my real goal.
Would you explain, please, how the Gematria cipher could work with languages other than English?
Yes. So it's originally in Hebrew, at least as far as we know at this day and age. Was there ever an alphabet before Hebrew that had it? Possibly. But if you look into it right now, they say it traces back to Hebrew. Hebrew has a 22-letter alphabet where every letter is also a number. That's understood within all those who learn Hebrew. So Hebrew is the original letter and number system. Ancient Greek, also the same. Every letter was a number. Where it's gematria in Hebrew, it's referred to as isopsophy in Greek. Over the years, I have not studied any other alphabets. I've studied a little bit of the Hebrew letter and number system in Greek system as well, but I have not personally looked into other languages such as Spanish or French, but I've gotten emails from people who've looked into the words and adding a numerical sequence to it. And there are people who've looked into their own languages and made some really interesting observations, including some overlaps with English and just the numbers that are behind the words. Roman numerals. So that's another connection we have with letters and numbers is Roman numerals. But as I was saying, it wouldn't surprise me if several alphabets have a numerical sequence behind them. It would. In fact, if I had to just guess blindly, I would assume they did.
Well, I was curious about that, Zach, because I was thinking, hey, are there other Gematria ciphers out there for different languages? And maybe there are that we don't know about yet.
Yeah, I imagine the answer is yes.
Well, Zachary Hubbard, I want to thank you again for being on In Other News, and especially for going into detail about the interference that had happened to you. Appreciate that, because I think that does give or lend a lot of importance to the work that you do. Could you tell listeners, please, once again, if they want to follow your work or get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Yes, I do have a website. It is gematriaeffect.news. I also have a community website, which is about community building, and the hope is to help people make new friends and network within their own cities, states. That website is freetofindtruth.com, and you can be as anonymous on there as you want. You don't have to reveal any of your personal information, but you can also share as much information as you would like. And I do encourage people, maybe you don't want to put your real name on there. You want to go by whatever you want to be called online. But I would encourage people to at least use their own state or their city, just because there is a feature on there that people can come on and search and see who's using the site that's in my city and my state. They could send you a message. You could develop a correspondence. There's been some nice relationships that have come together. There's at least one marriage. So I know that, pursuing the path of truth and finding out what's going on in this world, it can be very isolating. People lose friends and family. I think anyone out there who's ever done it knows exactly how that is. So at the same time, though, there are other people out there that are probably in your community that you wish you did know, and they'd be great to have a conversation with and be a friend. So freetofindtruth.com is the website I host. It even has a nice cell phone application if you have a smartphone. If you go to the App Store on any device and download Mighty Networks, then you just search Gematria Effect News, and it'll pull up the Free to Find Truth site. So yeah, and of course I'm also on YouTube. Right now I have 2 channels that are on the verge of being deleted, but I have Gematria Effect News 25, 24, 23, 22. 2 of those might be gone before you even hear this broadcast. I'm always making new Gematria Effect News channels because I'm always getting deleted and censored. And I'm also on Twitter at Free to Find Truth. If you search my name, Zachary K. Hubbard, you'll find my books online. You'll probably also find all the trolls that hate me, but those are probably the best avenues to find my work.
Thank you so much for being on Another News. Really appreciate the work that you're doing and sharing that information with your viewers and listeners. I think it's really important to get this out there.
Well, thank you again for having me on, and you're also very welcome, and I really appreciate it.